What is good, guys? It's Rey-Jay back with another video, and in this one I want to break down what's happening with SPY, Tesla, Nvidia, the QQQ, and a couple of other tickers, and break down what's happening with the economic calendar moving forward, what's going on with other factors involved with the markets, what you should be watching for as time progresses. But before I begin the devil's information, before I get into any more details, let me just mention a couple of things. I am personally not a financial planner, so take nothing I say as financial advice. And also, if you guys can, please check out the Moomoo link, which is down below and in the description. If you sign up for Moomoo and deposit $100, you are guaranteed 7 free stocks, and the offer ends very soon in just about 5 days from now. Anyways, now let's break down what's happening to the market moving forward. We saw a very, very interesting move in the markets as SPY and the QQQ and Nvidia broke all-time highs once again. This is exactly as we predicted for yesterday, because we did see once again Nvidia being used as a catalyst to push the stocks higher. However, as SPY did once again do what we predicted it would do, breaking all-time highs, the move did not last because I warned everyone in my morning video that if we lost 532.25, SPY would likely see a big move to the downside, and that's what ended up happening for today. The same thing happened to the QQQ, although it wasn't as extreme, and despite that, Nvidia held up very well. So we saw the market see this very, very big sell-off, and we have this big gap to fill now on the daily time frame on SPY at this level around 523. So we're going to see if that ends up being the case. Do we come all the way down to fill this gap or not? I personally think that there's a very good chance it will happen that way, but there's something else you have to watch for when it comes to support. So I'll be breaking down more details about what I mean by that. I'll break down more details about the charts in just a few minutes. Let's first talk about some very important data. So for tomorrow is going to be Friday, May 24th, 2024. At 9:35 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, we have Waller from the Fed giving a speech. And then at 10 o'clock a.m., we have the Michigan Consumer Sentiment Report, the 5-year inflationary expectations, and more data like that coming out 30 minutes after the market opens. Now, let me make it very clear that, when it comes to this data is not as significant as like CPI or FOMC, but this data is used as a reason for these big institutions, these market makers, to kind of move liquidity around. So that's the reason why when this data comes out, oftentimes look for some high volatility, look for a big move. And you guys could see how that really kind of like manifests into today, for example. So like this data was coming out, we saw the market making huge moves, just selling off like crazy, especially as this continued to come out, especially with the PMI report. As soon as this came out, the market just went berserk. So you can see how they use this as an excuse. The status uses their reason to just move liquidity around like crazy. And that's what's been happening so far. So for tomorrow, expect the same thing in a way where once this data drops, expect some volatility, and we'll see how things end up developing. What else is going on? I just wanted to mention that for SPY also has a very, very interesting looking options chain. SPY has a high 1.76 puts to call ratio, with max pain being at the 527 area. Now, with that happening, I want to make it very clear that SPY it doesn't necessarily have to see a big, massive short squeeze, at least immediately. I still think that there's a risk of a little bit more downside coming, but we could get a bounce thanks to this later on. I'll talk more about that in just a few minutes. For more data, right now, the fear and greed index is currently quite neutral. We're not super fearful and also not super, super greedy. We're in the middle right now, a little bit closer to the greedy side. This could shift a little bit more closer to the dead center before we do see a big shift, in my opinion. And I think that this is going to happen because of a big shift in the options chain. Now, when it comes to other things, the market momentum is still greedy. People are still greedy. The buyers are still around, at least according to this. It is dipping a bit because we're starting to see a lot more sellers stepping in. And then what else is interesting is the puts and call option positioning is still starting to go up. So people are starting to short the market. Shorts are coming back. They're thinking we're about to see a big move to the downside, but be very, very careful because things could shift in a flash. And there are also a lot of traps in the markets. So I'll talk about that in just a minute. And also the VIX, it hasn't officially broken past 15. We're not in a true massive breakout on the VIX. We haven't even broken above the 50 daily moving average. So we can't officially say that this is going to cause some kind of crash or anything like that. So with that being said, we have more data right over here. Please note that Nvidia did very well for earnings. That's what fueled the market's initial rally, the big gap up we got on SPY and the QQQ, but the market was not able to sustain those levels, at least for now. For more earnings, we just had TD Bank and then Ross announced its earnings. Ross did relatively well today. So when it comes to their earnings, they beat EPS with $1.46. They also beat on revenue at $4.86 billion above expectations, and their guidance was not bad. So their guidance for basically the second quarter is at between 2 and 3%. That's actually not bad for an increase, beating expectations of Wall Street by some extent. However, their full year fiscal 2025 earnings are not as great. The expectations, they're not as great because it's just very, very close to expectations, maybe a little bit below. Despite that, the overall sentiment is still pretty positive. The share price is still up pretty big. It's still holding up very well since they beat on earnings, and their shorter term projections are still good for the second quarter. That's why Ross is up. Now let's talk about the market. What do I see for tomorrow? So honestly, guys, we have a lot of bearish momentum right now. It is still very possible we come down to fill this gap, and I do think that's very probable. But SPY has to try to hold this support. We have a very, very critical support to be watching for. On my daily time frame, you can see right here, we have very tight levels. I usually use these because I do a lot of intraday trading. That's why my levels are this tight. But it's very simple, basically. If we hold below 525 tomorrow, we're going to be tipping all the way down to 523, and we're going to most likely come down to fill this gap. Now, if we hit the 523 zone, we want to see it basically hold above 523. That means that even if we do see a very, very swift move down, if we get bought back up and hold 523, that's going to be a sign of strength, and then the market could get a big bounce back up. But we have to try to hold around that 523 zone and not really collapse from there. So I think there's a very, very good chance that that is going to happen. If we lose 523 and fail to hold above it, then we could be tipping all the way down to at least 520. So just be very, very mindful of that, as we have more liquidity being drawn all the way down there. In my personal opinion, if you want to be bullish, you want to see it break 526.64 and also 528, but I don't necessarily favor that in my personal opinion. I think that when you look at the 4-hour time frame, the way SPY is looking, in my opinion, it is looking a bit more bearish, and we are favoring bears a little bit more. So for tomorrow, since we're very close to our 50 EMA, I think that it's very likely that SPY might rebound in the morning during the pre-market, hit 526.64 or something like that, and then continue to sell off, and we might actually come all the way down to this gap fill around 523. This 522 to 523 zone is specifically the area, specifically 523 though. And when we hit that area, so we get a little pop and drop like move, the most likely possibility is we get a little bounce after that. We see SPY kind of rebound at the end of the day and close very close to max pain at 527. I think that's what's going to most likely happen. So a little pop and drop like move, we fill our gap, then we get a bounce is the most likely possibility. If we close below 523 tomorrow, that's going to be a sign of weakness, but I don't really favor that. I think we're more likely to just pop and drop for the gap fill, then try to rebound after that. When it comes to other pieces of news, I just want to call out that Nvidia is doing relatively well right now. We have a very, very strong uptrend. We broke all-time highs, holding above 1,000, which is absolutely insane. However, when I look at my drawings, I do have a very, very key-looking Fibonacci retracement tool right here I wanted to show you. So Nvidia is approaching the support at 1,029.236 retracement. We could, test this. If we do lose this, we might go a little bit closer to 1,008 before we try to bounce. So look for a little dip on the chart. It might dip just a little bit before we try to get that bounce. That's going to be very key for how we end up moving. For Tesla's looking kind of weak on the 4-hour time frame, but here's the thing about Tesla. Let me close these just to show you. Look at the chart. It loves to base between 173 and 172. You guys can see this zone right over here. It loves to base around here. It actually bounced off here 1, 2, 3, 4 times. So that's going to be a very, very nice support for Tesla. I think that as long as Tesla maintains the structure, we could actually shuffle in the 172 zone for some time and then possibly get a rebound back up to like 176, as long as there's no major bad news. If we get a very, very bad piece of news, okay, and we lose 172, we have a gap to fill all the way down to 168, okay? If we lose 172, we turn bearish. If we manage to break past 176 and try to hold above it, yes, we could make a bullish move to the upside back up towards 178, but I don't really favor that to happen immediately. I think we're more likely to see Tesla kind of shuffle down here, maybe dip a little bit more to 172, shuffle for some time before it tries to rebound. I do think a rebound will likely come next week so long as there's no major bad news. But first, we might do a lot of shuffling, a lot of sideways price action within the support area. So always be prepared for anything on Tesla because Tesla is very news dependent and it's very manipulated. So sometimes technicals don't always work as well, predicting it on a day-to-day basis. But despite that, I still see potential in the chart. So for tomorrow, make sure you're prepared for anything based off the levels, but just know that there's a risk it's going to dip a little bit more towards 172 to 173, shuffle for a bit, then eventually try to rebound. If we lose that support, then it is what it is. Be prepared for a bit more downside before we get the bounce. Okay, so watch and see. Do we hold 172 then eventually try to bounce, or do we go a little bit lower than that to fill our gap at 168 and then get a bounce? It's got to be one of those two most likely, so we'll wait and see. For the QQQ, I think that the QQQ is in a very, very critical place right now. One thing you'll notice is that we have this big imbalance to fill down here. We have a gap to fill at 446 on the daily time frame. Let me pull up the daily chart just to kind of show you what this looks like. The daily has this gap to fill right over here. So we could actually come down to fill this gap at 446. Might kind of pop and then drop a little bit lower. I think that we're going to likely test 450 very soon, if not 446. If we lose that, then we might get a bounce after that, after we fill that gap. The QQQ has some potential downside, in my opinion. It didn't actually drop too much yet, but there is a risk of it actually potentially happening. On top of this, I just want to make it very clear that um, we have resistance also around this 456 area and also at 458. I think there's a very good chance that this could continue to fall. And I think that we'll have to see how it holds 450 first, if not 446. But then look for a bounce at one of those levels is the most likely possibility. Look for a pop and drop, test of 450, if not 446, and a bounce after that, in my personal opinion. That is the most likely possibility. Also, when you look at the 4-hour time frame, the 4-hour kind of shows that as a strong possibility because that's kind of like aligning with where our 50 EMA happens to be. It might catch up to this 450 area. So I do see it testing at least that before it tries to rebound. For Apple's looking a little bit more bearish. We're actually falling quite a bit. We're kind of shuffling near our 50 EMA. And notice that the 4-hour has this gap all the way down towards 180, 183. So I also see support right over here around 185. I think tomorrow Apple might try to rebound a little bit, retest this zone right here, this 187 zone, and it could actually fall a little bit more towards 185. Now, we could excuse me, we could end up bouncing off 185, or we might dip a little bit below it to fill the gap and then get the bounce. But look for a little bit more downside before we get the bounce, in my personal opinion, as the most likely possibility. Looking at Bitcoin started the dip. I called this in my morning video that we might see a dip all the way down to our key levels, and that's what ended up happening right over here. So I would say watch this 67,636 zone, the 50 EMA. We'll see if we get a little rebound back up to 69,000 or not. I think it might shuffle down here in the 67,000 area, maybe tip a little bit more before we try to rebound back up towards 69,000. With that being said, that is it for the main five and Bitcoin. However, now let's just break down what's happening with the rest of the market. I'm going to be very quick with this part, by the way, guys, because I want to make this video kind of quick. So what do I see for the remainder of stocks out there? For NEO has a double top like structure. It's also starting to dip a little bit, and we have another gap to fill all the way down here. I think that with the negative European news about tariffs being threatened, there's a good chance NEO will eventually dip to fill this gap. We might rebound and retest 4.9 to 5 tomorrow before it tries to continue to shuffle, but I still see a risk of this kind of underperforming temporarily, at least as we approach, I would say, June. June is going to be big. We have earnings, not to mention delivery, so we'll see how that ends up affecting us. So I'll be very patient. For Palantir, I wanted to call out that this is looking a bit more bearish. We're testing this key trend line right here, this white trend line I have drawn out. So we'll see if we bounce off this. We might not get the bounce immediately. We might actually break through the trend line and test 20.5 into the 20s. I think it might be going. Then we'll see if we get a bounce after that. But look for a little bit more downside before anything else. For Supermicro, we got a very, very big push, almost to 1,000. How crazy is that? Before we got a big rejection. And I see this imbalance to fill down here at 828. So look for a retest of 867 and then a rejection and move all the way down to at least the 820 area, or even lower than that, potentially to 800. We look a bit more bearish for now, and then watch for a bounce after that. For Rivian, we have a head and shoulders like structure, and we are dipping a bit. Watch 10 as support. If we lose this, we're going to be dipping all the way down towards 9.5. The resistance at 10.24. I think there's a good chance it might reject and end up dipping. For SoFi is once again in a very, very interesting place. I think that this might rebound just a little bit into the sevens before, before it gets a rejection and start dipping all the way down to lower levels, all the way down here towards 6.68. Might be a little bit more of a dip, a little pop and drop like move for SoFi before we get a big bounce. So I'll be watching for that very, very carefully. For the IWM Russell 2000, we have the 200 EMA right up here at 202. We might rebound a little bit towards 205. Then we may continue to sink down a little bit lower. I think that it might either try to bounce off 202 or it could go all the way down to 200 before we try to get this bounce. So this previous liquidity zone, this previous resistance becoming support will be another level I kind of watch. And that happens to be right over here around this, I think it's 198 to 200 area. Might be all the way down towards 200. Once again, we have this zone right here. So might rebound a bit, come down lower to either 202 if not 200, and then try to get a bounce after that. For AMD's, just like Nvidia, huge pump. We did call out the pump that was coming, but then we got a big rejection. Might dip a little bit more towards this previous resistance right here at 156 before we try to get a bounce. So watch for that as the most likely possibility. For ARM in my opinion, is just kind of shuffling right over here. It actually held up nicely. Watch the 50 EMA at 111. If we lose that, we're going to dip a little bit more. If we hold this, we're going to be looking for a bounce tomorrow back up towards 16 or by Monday. So it's actually outperforming the market, showing some strength. For Coinbase, we're trading sideways right now. We are potentially forming like this little structure where we can actually see it retest this 221 area. It might shuffle around here. Then we're going to be looking for a rebound by next week to this imbalance towards 230. So look for a little bit of a dip back down to this 220, if not 218 area, then a bounce after that. For Amazon, in my personal opinion, is actually dipping a little bit more. We have the 200 EMA to be watching for. If we do lose this, we're going to be dipping a little bit lower. So watch 180. If we lose 180, look for 178, then a bounce. If we hold 180, then we could bounce back up to 182 to 184. So watch and see. For Meta, it's the same thing essentially. We have support currently where we are right now. Now we have like a head and shoulders like structure, so I'd be a little bit careful with this. But watch this support at 462. If we lose that tomorrow, there's going to be a bigger dip coming all the way down towards this gap fill into the 450s. If we hold 462, look for a bounce next week all the way up to 468. For Microsoft, we're looking a little bit weak right now. We saw quite a bit of a rejection. We're going to likely test this 424 area. If we lose that, look for 421, then a bounce. If we hold for 24, look for a bounce there, but it might dip a little bit more. It looks kind of weak to me. For Google, looks a little bit weak as well. I think we might test 174. If we lose that, look for a test of 173, and then we could bounce there, or we might bounce off 174. So watch for that. For GME, GameStop's looking kind of bearish now because I called out the support. So I was saying we need to hold 20 to rebound. We lost 20. Now we have a gap to fill, so it might dip a little bit more towards the 17s. So look for a pop and drop into the 17s and see if we get a bounce off that or not. But a little bit more downsides coming. AMC not doing as great. I do think AMC will get a bounce later on over the next few months. But for now, it's just kind of shuffling around this 50 EMA. If we lose 4.56, we could go a little bit lower towards 4.3 before we try to get a bounce. But for now, I think it's going to continue to shuffle in this range. I still think, and I want to note that I think AMC and GameStop will get a push in the next 2 months. A very, very nice move, but it's going to take a while, so you have to be very patient with it. For DJT, we're going to be looking at support right here at our 20 EMA. Could retest 42 and then try to bounce, or even bounce from here and we get back up to 46.64. Might dip a bit more though. We could actually retest 42 before we end up seeing that move. For the VIX is trying to rebound a little bit. Could we go a little higher? We could try to tag our 200 EMA around 14 and then reject, but there's no confirmed breakout yet. It's starting to build some strength. It's only up 3.9%. I wouldn't turn way too bullish on this. We just have to give it some time. But so far, there's no confirmed breakout. We have to give it some time. The 10-year Treasury yield went up thanks to the Fed yesterday, so we'll see if this continues. If this keeps going, we could go a little higher towards this 4.5 area. So we'll just give it some time. For the dollar index, we went up a little bit. We actually broke past the 200 EMA. So it might go up to this imbalance towards 105.25, and we'll see if we get a rejection or not. I'll be very patient nonetheless. So with that being said, guys, I just want to say I really appreciate every single one of you guys so much. I hope you guys have an absolutely incredible rest of the day. For SPY, I think that there is a risk of this gap potentially getting filled over here. So for a little bit more downside, there's a very, very strong possibility that's going to happen. But if we do fill the gap, we got to hold this support for a bounce. If we lose it, then we could dip lower. So watch and see how well we hold 523 to 522 tomorrow on SPY, and we'll see how things go. We could pop in the morning before we continue lower, fill the gap, and we'll see what the reaction is. Will we get a big bounce towards the end of the day because of this options chain? It's always a strong possibility with all the puts expiring. So don't forget that once again, market makers do manipulate these stocks and they're getting ready for some interesting volatility. All right, that's it for this one. Thank you guys so much for listening. I'll see you guys tomorrow morning before the market opens, and peace out.